All right, so it's our long-awaited, or at least my long-awaited conversation about progressive presidents. So, who are the progressive presidents? Well, first we have Roosevelt. There he is, Teddy Roosevelt, right? Not Franklin Delano Roosevelt, but Teddy Roosevelt. You may remember him from Secretary of War under during the or in the build-up to the Spanish-American War, then as a Rough Rider, then as the vice president under McKinley, and McKinley will be assassinated, and Roosevelt will come to office. Here's Taft, frenemy of Roosevelt, my favorite president. Don't laugh at me, I will tell you why. Right in the middle there. And then finally, Woodrow Wilson as the final progressive president. And we know him most from World War I and the League of Nations and that kind of thing. Progressive presidents come from all across the political spectrum. I want to just remind us what we said at the very beginning of our conversation about progressivism, that this is not a single party idea, that you can be a progressive Democrat but also a progressive Republican, and that we really want to drop the modern day understanding of what a progressive is politically, because that is not what we are talking about here when we talk about progressivism. We're talking about efficiencies. We're not talking about, left politics. So Roosevelt is a Republican. Taft is a Republican. And Wilson is a Democrat. Okay? All three of these men are considered to be progressive presidents. Some more progressive than others, certainly. Some of their ideas more progressive than others. But all of them are considered progressive presidents. Okay, Roosevelt as a progressive. Roosevelt is a social Darwinist. If you remember what social Darwinism is, I think we've talked about it 2 times. So he is a social Darwinist when it comes to international politics. However, domestically, he is a progressive. He believed might makes right, and he believed in survival of the fittest when it came to expansion, right? When it came to our behavior overseas. But at home, he believed in efficiencies, all right? In 1901, President McKinley will be assassinated, and Teddy Roosevelt will become President of the United States. Roosevelt is considered to be the first progressive president, and he is an advocate, at least initially, for moderate and gradual reforms. He saw progressivism as a movement that he could use in order to reform his society, but he did not want to take things too far and totally remake society. So he thought he could use progressivism as a way to protect the U.S. and U.S. traditional society, as a way to protect it from what he thought would be more radical reforms that would happen if something wasn't done more moderately in the immediate future. He believed when it came to trust, when it came to monopolies, remember we talked about trust busting as being a big thing of progressives, and that if businesses were too big, it was bad for competition, and that a lack of competition was bad for consumers. Roosevelt doesn't wholeheartedly accept that. He actually believes that most businesses are good. Big businesses even are good. That big can be beautiful, he said. However, he thought that he needed to regulate them. So some trusts he did bust because he thought there was no way to control them, there was no way to regulate them. But others he simply regulated. He gets the nickname as a trust-busting president, but actually Taft busts way more trust than Roosevelt did. He was more of a regulation kind of guy when it came to big businesses. But he did focus on what we would call the 3 C's of Roosevelt's presidency. He wanted to control corporations, institute consumer protections, and conservation of natural resources. An example of how he deals with unions comes in the 1902 coal strike of the United Mine Workers, or the UMW. It really threatens to take a more serious toll on the wider population if the strike isn't ended. Because remember, if coal miners go on strike across the country, which is what this was, it would really put a halt on steel production, which would put a halt on industry. So there was a real need to figure out what the government's role would be in terms of arbitration or forcing the unions back to work. So Roosevelt does step in with the federal government and urge arbitration. Even though it seemed like had he done nothing, the union would have gotten a little bit more of what they wanted through their negotiations. Roosevelt does sort of set the precedent for government intervention in labor disputes. J.P. Morgan is one of those really influential industrial leaders that we've talked about. He is an investment banker, and he has a group called Northern Security. It's planning to merge stock and create a railroad monopoly. What would happen to prices if the monopoly occurs? So Roosevelt will sue J.P. Morgan successfully under the Sherman Antitrust Act and block the railroad merger. Another example of Roosevelt taking on big businesses. At his urging, Congress will also create the Department of Commerce and Labor in 1902. An example of him using the power of this new department would be brokering a quote-unquote gentleman's agreement, or sort of like a handshake contract with U.S. Steel. In 1906, Congress passes the Hepburn Act, which strengthens the Interstate Commerce Commission. It gives the Interstate Commerce Commission the power to set railroad rates. This Hepburn Act allowed the government to regulate shipping rates and charged by railroads and other carriers. He's also going to tackle consumer protection. Remember Upton Sinclair, the muckraker, wrote the book The Jungle, exposing the sort of very disgusting conditions of the meatpacking industry. So the Meat Inspection Act and the Pure Food and Drug Act were passed also in 1906. There's a real need. I love this advertisement. Cocaine toothache drops. Look, will help your little kids. There's a real need to regulate what is inside medicine, what medicines are actually going to contain medicines and which are not. There's a real need to start to label things and to start to regulate both the conditions of the places where your food is being made and packed, and also what is in your medication. So that's what the Meat Inspection and the Pure Food and Drug Act do. This is the election of 1904. Roosevelt, the Republican, does very well. He's going to run for election on his idea of a square deal, right? Saying that the job of government was to balance the competing interests of business and consumer for the sake, though, of the public good. And when he runs for his second term, he will take even more progressive positions. He will advocate for an 8-hour workday, for broader compensation for victims of industrial accidents, that's workman's comp, to place inheritance on income taxes, and to regulate the stock market. A lot of those might look familiar to you from our discussion of Wisconsin. A lot of those were progressive reforms that had already started to take place at the state level. The gap in the progressive and conservative voices within the Republican Party will start to grow wider. So Roosevelt is a Republican within this progressive pocket, but there are Republicans who are not progressives. Those are called conservative Republicans, and that is going to be a rift that will be continuously exposed. Roosevelt is also going to focus a lot on conservation. He will urge Americans to conserve natural resources, and he advocated for the need to manage and conserve public land. I want to put up a picture here. So it's just Roosevelt on the left and John Muir on the right. If you've ever been out to California, they have Muir Woods, Muir National Park. So these two men are living at the same time period, working together for the sake of the environment. But while they do share a lot of passions for environmental protection, they do have some differences. So Roosevelt is what we would call a conservationist. So for example, Roosevelt was a hunter, a big game hunter even. So how can you be a big game hunter and an environmentalist? Well, you are a conservationist. Conservationists believe in using resources responsibly. Using resources responsibly. John Muir is a preservationist. Preservationists believe that you preserve, so you keep environmental resources exactly as they are. So you need to have untapped wilderness. And these two men sort of together are going to balance their differing ideas and come away with some really cool things. This is why Roosevelt's called the founder of our national parks, because under him our national parkland increases. Yeah. In 1902, we have the Newlands Reclamation Act, which is going to authorize the use of federal funds to form from public land sales to pay for the irrigation and land development projects to encourage people to be able to use Western land. And then a man named Gifford Pinchot, we should know who he is. He is going to be appointed the head of the U.S. Forest Service in 1905. And under him, he will hire professional managers. That's very progressive, right? Very efficient, and begin to regulate the use of federal land as opposed to just simply selling it to lumber companies, which is what had been done in the past. There he is. And here is a map of our conservation. So the purple, which is not a lot, but the purple are our national land conservation territory that's set aside prior to Roosevelt's presidency. All of the green is during Roosevelt's presidency, and then the orange is after. Roosevelt's legacy. Roosevelt will be remembered for his use of the bully pulpit. The bully pulpit is just the presidency. Roosevelt will be remembered for using the power of the presidency to effect change and increasing, therefore, the power of the executive branch. People love Teddy Roosevelt. I like Teddy Roosevelt. I don't love Teddy Roosevelt. He's one of those people that it sounds really cool to say that you love Teddy Roosevelt, I think, and he does do a lot of really incredible things. But if you had actually been living during the time of Teddy Roosevelt, you might have felt differently. I don't know. But I don't think anybody loved Teddy Roosevelt more than Teddy Roosevelt loved Teddy Roosevelt. So legislation that is passed during Roosevelt's presidency: the Sherman Antitrust Act, the National Reclamation Act, the Elkins Act, the Hepburn Act, the Meat Inspection Act, and the Pure Food and Drug Act. So make sure that you are on some level familiar with all of these. I'm trying to decide. Here, we'll stop here, and then I'll break this next part up into a separate section.